is Introduction to General Psychiatry, Classification of Psychiatric Illnesses, and Etiology of Psychiatric Disorders. So what is psychiatry? Psychiatry is that branch of medicine dealing with mental disorder and its treatment. It includes the prevention, assessment, diagnosis, treatment, and the rehabilitation of mental illness. Rehabilitation means somebody may have chronic enduring mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, for example. So that requires a lot of rehabilitation. They need to be taught essential life skills, day-to-day activities. They need to have some vocational skills so that they can get a job. All this is part of rehabilitation. Psych means the soul or the mind. Iatros means the healer. So the physician who heals the mind is a psychiatrist. That's what it means. What is the role of psychiatrist? To collect clinical data objectively and accurately. Objectively means you should not bring in your own opinions, pre-existing notions during your assessment. You should keep an open mind. Okay? And accurately, history taking and mental state examination, to organize the data in a systematic and balanced way. That is very important so that you can make an accurate diagnosis and classify the condition. To arrive at a diagnosis and initiate appropriate management strategies, we should include a biopsychosocial model of formulation and management. Capacity for intuitive understanding of each patient as an individual. That is very important. You have to approach everything on a case-to-case basis. One size fits all does not work as a model in psychiatry. It is every patient, every condition has to be treated individually. So psychiatry per se may be confused with psychology, but there is a difference. Even though there is a lot of overlap, and even though they work together, psychiatrist's role is different from a psychologist's role. Psychology is a science that investigates behavior, experience, and normal functioning of the mind, specialized in research and clinical application of psychological technique. You know, in the biopsychosocial table, the middle part, psychological, that is what psychologists are concerned with. They are concerned with the workings of the mind. They do not consider bodily functions. That is the job of a doctor who is a psychiatrist, who will take a more holistic approach. Medical issues, bodily issues, psychological issues, and social issues. Whereas psychologists are concerned only with the workings of the mind. Behavioral psychology, experimental psychology, counseling, talking therapies, psychological assessments like IQ assessments. This is what they do. Whereas psychiatrist considers, let me finish this point. Psychiatrist considers the bodily function also, and also gives medications. Psychologists will not prescribe medications. Psychiatrist prescribes the psychotropic medications, such as antidepressants or antipsychotics or benzodiazepines or whatever it is. Yes, what was your doubt?
So if someone who is depressed, who should that person see, a psychiatrist or a psychologist?
Always person gets referred to the psychiatrist. In the vast majority of cases, I would say 90% of the cases, if somebody has any mental illness, they'll first see the psychiatrist. Psychiatrist makes a very comprehensive assessment, mental state, history, mental state, physical examination, everything. And then if the person requires counseling, the patient is then referred to the psychologist. For example, if the psychiatrist makes a diagnosis of anxiety disorder, he may put the patient on anti-anxiety medications such as benzodiazepines or SSRIs or whatever, and then say, actually this person also requires relaxation therapy apart from the medications, or cognitive behavior therapy apart from the medications. Therefore, I'm going to refer this patient to my colleague, the psychologist, so that he or she can do relaxation therapy or cognitive behavior therapy. You understand? That's what usually happens. Unless in rare cases where it is a marital issue. Suppose there is a marital strife between the husband and wife, and they are seeking counseling straight away. They don't have any mental illness. They just want to sort out the differences that are cropped up between them. They will go directly to the psychologist who specializes in marital therapy or couple therapy, and they will meet such and such a person directly. In case during marital therapy, the psychologist realizes that actually the wife is very depressed because of the marital problems, and because of the depression she will require treatment, then she can refer the patient, that lady, to the psychiatrist. That can also happen. But usually it is the other way around. The psychiatrist sees the patient first, then refers to psychologist or occupational therapist or physiotherapist or whoever, social worker or whatever. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Psychotherapy is the treatment that the psychologist will do. That is usually talking therapy, nothing to do with drugs. Okay? Psychoanalysis is a particular type of psychotherapy which goes deeper into the subconscious mind, dream analysis, early life experiences, like conscious mind and all those things. So it is a teamwork. Mental health care is a teamwork. It is not just psychiatrist, it is not just psychologist. It is a multidisciplinary team. There are psychiatrist, clinical psychologist, psychiatric nurse, a nurse who is specially trained in managing mental illnesses and handling mental patients is a psychiatric nurse. Okay? There may be two types of psychiatric nurses. One who stays in the ward, psychiatric ward, or a community psychiatric nurse. In the UK, they have something called CPN, community psychiatric nurse, who goes out to the patient's homes to treat the patient. Okay, so they are all both psychiatric nurses. Occupational therapists who go about looking at the patient's home environment to see if any changes are required. For example, if a patient has dementia, she may go and suggest safety measures such as safety in the kitchen, saying the stove should be locked, door should be locked at all times, there should be a stair lift because the patient can have a fall. So that is the role of an occupational therapist. Somebody can also be a speech and language therapist who will be able to assist the person's speech and swallowing also, which is also required in dementia. Psychiatric social worker, person who visits the patient's homes to make sure everything is okay, whether the person's home is suitable for that patient given the mental condition. For example, if a person with dementia, is he safe in his home? Or should he be in a residential home requiring 24 hours care? So that is the job of the social workers. There can be highly specialized social workers also called mental health social workers who are approved by the government to go and make assessments of the patient's condition in their home environment. And if the social worker feels that he or she is a threat to society or himself, they can call the psychiatrist and the police to make an assessment and take the patient to an inpatient unit under some section of the Mental Health Act. Subspecialties of psychiatry. Psychiatry is a vast ocean. Under that you have many divisions. General adult psychiatry, mostly these are UK based terminologies because I did my psychiatric training in the UK. So
Okay.
general adult psychiatry is what it states. It's adult, nothing to do with children, and it's general. All the psychiatric conditions are considered under that. But if you want to be more specialized, you can have child and adolescent psychiatry, where you see only up to 16 years of age. Geriatric or psychogeriatric psychiatry is after 65 years of age. Elderly psychiatry. Mostly you will be seeing things like elderly depression and dementias. Learning disabilities, it's called that in the UK, but we also call it mental retardation. Okay, that was my super specialty actually in the UK. Then addiction and substance abuse psychiatry, which is to do with drugs and their effects and their management. Okay, alcohol, nicotine, and everything. Forensic psychiatry, which is the relationship between crime and mental illness. That is what it is. Which one comes first is very difficult to say. A criminal who is already a criminal may develop some psychiatric illness later on. On the other hand, a person with mental illness can commit a crime if he or she is a risk to himself or others. So all these come under the realm of forensic psychiatry. Okay, please also remember that mental illness can be used as a defense in criminal cases. Suppose somebody is charged with a crime, he goes for a trial in a court of law. His lawyer may plead insanity and say that he was mentally ill at the time of committing the crime. Therefore, he should not be given a very harsh punishment. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes,
So
sir.
that is when the court will ask for a report from the forensic psychiatrist, and the forensic psychiatrist will have to make a very, very comprehensive report on the patient's mental condition and give an opinion as to whether it is possible whether the person committed that crime under the influence of some mental illness, or if the mental illness came after he committed the crime. It's a very tricky issue and it's a very difficult subject. Okay. Liaison psychiatry. Liaison is liaising with others. There is psychiatry unit based in a multi-specialty hospital. That means you'll be receiving referrals and discussing about patients with physicians, surgeons, gynecologists, everybody. So you're just part of the overall medical team. Okay. Emergency psychiatry. We'll talk about emergency psychiatric conditions later on. And that is also one of the branches. It would include things like violent behavior, suicide management, drug emergencies, those sort of things. Behavioral medicine, which is mainly under psychology, and military psychiatry, which is to do with mental health of people in military services. So let's move on. So first of all, start with the basic stuff. You know this WHO definition of health, right? I'm sure you would have come across the definition of health in community medicine and primary care and all that. But what about the definition of mental health? So as it states here, state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So it's not just mental health, it is holistic health. So that is the key word here. It has to be physical well-being, social well-being, because our mental health is related to our social interactions. Okay. And it's not just saying there is no disease. You need to be well adjusted to your environment. You should be in a good bodily state. You should be happy and functional. And it's not just the absence of disease or handicap or whatever. Okay, so that's the WHO definition. So let's move on. So what do we mean by the consequences of mental illness? You know, what happens exactly? First thing that happens is impairment. See, one of the things you have to understand is straight off the bat, mental health, as far as mental health and physical health are concerned, they are different. We don't have any basic parameters to define and measure what kind of health a person is having. For example, if you go to a physician, you've done your medical posting, right, in year 3. If you want to record a person's overall health, what would you do? You will check his pulse, you'll check his blood pressure, you'll do your systemic examination, and you'll get a general idea, right? But there is no such thing in psychiatry, you know. So we have to rely on our assessment, which includes history taking and mental state examination every time we see the patient, because the picture keeps changing all the time, and sometimes it can change drastically. So it is difficult to define what is exactly good health as far as mental health is concerned, what is exactly out of the normal, and what are the criteria to define disease process. But still, we can see some consequences of having mental illness, which is not present in people who are of sound mental health, which we described using that WHO definition earlier. Okay, you understand what I'm saying? So what happens if a person becomes mentally ill? First is impairment. That is a pathological defect due to the disease process. So, for example, if somebody is depressed, they lose interest, is it not? I mean, one of the key core features of depression is loss of interest, suicidal thoughts, loss of appetite, what we call the biological features. So all these are impairments that you see in the day-to-day life of a person with depression. So that is just one example. So likewise, the things change from condition to condition. Now, the disability, once you have an impairment, such as depression, let's stick with depression as an example, that leads to disability, which is limitation of physical and/or psychological functioning resulting from the impairment. So direct consequence of impairment is disability. So disability results from impairment. So let's say the impairment is depression. So what is the disability that you see with depression? You don't feel like coming out, your social life becomes zero, basically, because you are isolating yourself. You have loss of interest. You don't feel like meeting anybody or doing anything. You don't feel like attending to your daily activities. You don't feel like going to your job. No interests, no hobbies, no contacts. That's what would happen. And that is a very limited existence, isn't it? It's a very restricted existence. And you are experiencing some of that now as you are confined, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So the next step or the final step, if somebody has mental illness, is handicap. So which is ongoing socio-occupational dysfunction due to the impairment of disability. So it continues on from having impairment and disability. So handicap is the overall loss of your day-to-day function. Okay. So these three are interrelated and one leads to another. So these are the consequences of having mental illness. In other words, if everybody experiences some degree of mental upset every day, right? Everybody gets angry. Everybody feels sad once in a while. But if it progresses to these three, impairment, disability, leading on to handicap, that is when we say that it's not just a passing mental phenomenon, but it is a mental illness or a mental disorder that requires treatment. So that is the key difference here. You understand? Classification. So what is the need for classifying mental illnesses? Why can't we just say mental illness? Probably depression. Why do I need to classify it as mild depression, severe depression, paranoid schizophrenia, or catatonic schizophrenia? So these are the three key reasons why. One is, as I told you, the concepts in psychiatry can be very woolly. They are not definite. You know, when I say low mood, what do you mean by low mood? As I told you, everybody experiences low mood, right? Everybody experiences sadness. Everybody experiences anxiety on a daily basis. So we need some criteria to define what is illness, and we need to classify that so that our communication improves. Suppose you and I are two doctors discussing about a patient, let's say. Say I am referring a patient to you, and you are also one of the doctors in another area or something. So I will call you up and I'll say, I'm referring such and such a person. He's got paranoid schizophrenia in relapse, and he was doing very well all these days, but now the illness has relapsed and he would require ongoing treatment and care. So the moment I say paranoid schizophrenia in relapse, you already know that he's got a serious mental illness called schizophrenia, and he's got a subtype of schizophrenia called paranoid schizophrenia, and not hebephrenic schizophrenia or catatonic schizophrenia or simple schizophrenia or any of those. You will understand all those terminologies when you talk about schizophrenia. And the third thing is he's in relapse. That means he's had the illness before, and now there was a period of remission when the symptoms were controlled, but now it is in relapse. That means the illness episode has come back. So you understand all these things just because we have classified and categorized these conditions. And I did not go into great details about the symptoms that this patient has. Like I did not tell you he has delusions of persecution, and he's having third-person auditory hallucinations. I did not go into all those details. You'll understand straight away that with paranoid schizophrenia, he's likely to have all these symptoms. So the need is communication between professionals in response to symptoms, treatments, and prognosis. Treatment also, when I say paranoid schizophrenia, you will know straight away that you will have to give him some antipsychotic medication, right? Such as risperidone or olanzapine or whatever. And you also know the prognosis. It is very guarded prognosis in schizophrenia, and you might have to tell the family that it may be episodic by nature, and the main thing is to control the symptoms instead of looking for an outright cure. So all these things are already understood without you and I having to waste time over going into all these details. So that is the reason, one of the reasons why we need to classify. Secondly, research, to facilitate research with comparable group of patients. For example, let's say I take pregnant women, a group of pregnant women, right? And they are experiencing anxiety. So I'll take that group, and I know that they have anxiety, and we have classified and quantified the amount of anxiety that they are experiencing. Okay? And it has caused all those three things that we discussed earlier: impairment, disability, and handicap. Therefore, it is anxiety disorder and not any day-to-day anxiety. I will take that group and I will compare it with non-pregnant women who also have similar type of anxiety. And then I'll go about seeing what is the similarity between these two groups, or what is the difference. Is there any vulnerability factor? We can match them for their height, weight, age, racial features, everything. So all these things can be done once you classify the condition. So as to facilitate research, that is the next use of classifying. Okay. Thirdly, to undertake epidemiological studies for research and service planning. Yes. So you have done your community and primary care, so you would know what I mean by epidemiological studies. These are large-scale studies involving entire groups of populations, right?
Yes.
Correct? Yes.
Yes.
So, for example, say Bangalore, the high rates of alcohol, which is true, by the way, high rate of alcohol, and in Mysore, the rates are very low. So what is it that, so you might take up a large-scale epidemiological study involving these two cities to see, are there any demographic factors, vocational factors, social factors for alcohol dependence in Bangalore that is not there in Mysore. So you make a comparison, right? So it helps in research, not just between groups of patients, but also large-scale research, epidemiological studies. You would want to see in that example, what are the demographic features that is associated with alcoholism. Being male is a bigger risk factor for somebody to become alcohol dependent, or any drug dependence for that matter. Okay? Being depressed or having any mental illness is a risk factor for alcohol dependence. Being divorced, being single, job loss is a risk factor for becoming alcohol dependent. So these are the studies that you can do once you classify and identify the condition. Right, so moving on into greater details of classification, there are different types of classification. Classification itself has various types within psychiatry. And the reason for that is these are very, very complex and complicated conditions, number one. And secondly, there are a lot of overlaps between each of these conditions. You understand what I mean? There is very subtle difference between mild depression and moderate depression. And that's why I say that we need to do constant assessment of the patient's, repeated assessment of the patient's mental state to understand the difference between mild depression and moderate depression. When will mild become moderate, and when will moderate become severe? And also it is patient specific. You can't just apply mild depression to an entire group of patients, because every patient's mental state is different. Every patient's reaction to adversities is different. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
There may be an overlap between paranoid schizophrenia and hebephrenic schizophrenia. Okay, so these are all woolly concepts. Nothing. It's not concrete. Sometimes they can be very abstract. So that's why we have different types of classification. So one is categorical classification. What do you understand by that? It is what it says. It is categories. So you put the disorder in various categories. Okay. So for example, depression and mania would come under which category? Mood disorders. Disorders of mood.
Disorders.
Yeah. See, mood and affect are two different things. Affect is what we express on our face, depending on the situation. So if you hear a sad story, you look sad, right? So the sad look on your face is the affect. Whereas the underlying emotional state, which does not change too much, that is mood. Mood disorders are depression. So if that mood becomes too low and as I told you, associated with biological features like loss of appetite, weight, sleep disturbance, all those things, it becomes depression. On the other hand, if it goes in the opposite direction, it becomes high, you become extremely happy, needlessly overactive, losing sleep and all that, it becomes mania. So both are under mood disorders. There are other conditions where there is no insight, which means the patient does not realize he or she is mentally ill. They have delusions, they have hallucinations. All this will come under psychotic conditions. Okay? On the slide, the last two divisions, neurosis and psychosis. Can you see that? There are two categories, two broad categories of mental illnesses. I'll talk about neurosis and psychosis later on. So that is categories, putting them in categories. Substance disorders, that is a category. Under that you have alcohol dependence, cannabis, nicotine, hallucinogens, cocaine, all the substances will come under that. Even caffeine is a substance, even that will come under substance disorders. Childhood disorders, that is another category. You have ADHD, tic disorder, autism. You understand what I'm trying to say? It is not enough to categorize. We need to further qualify to understand what kind of problem the patient is happening. It's not just enough to say this patient is depressed, right? I have to decide as a clinician how severe his depression is. Is it requiring treatment straight away? Can I withhold the treatment and see whether he will improve or not, right? So that is where these dimensions will, that is where these dimensions will come into the picture. So by dimensions, I mean it's a degree of severity. That's what we are trying to say here. Therefore, I will further, in that patient, in that example, I will go about classifying that person's condition as mild, moderate, or severe based on some criteria, which we'll talk about later on. So once I know it's mild depression, I will say, okay, I think I can withhold the treatment for now. Let's see how it goes. If it progresses to moderate or severe, then I'll start the treatment. In the meantime, I will help him with his social situation, relationship issues, and maybe with that mild depression will improve and he will become normal again. On the other hand, if another person comes with severe depression, with suicidal ideas, I'm going to take a totally different therapeutic approach, correct? I'm not going to send him home saying, yeah, just see how it goes and then we'll decide. I'm going to admit him straight away, put him on antidepressant medications, or give him ECT if required. So the entire thing changes, which is why the dimensions of these categories or illnesses is very important. So the degrees of illness is dimension. and usually it is expressed as mild, moderate, and severe. See, even in the category of mood disorders, there is a spectrum. Spectrum, you know the spectrum, right? From one end to another end, like a rainbow, VIBGYOR, V2, or like that you have spectrum. In a broad category of mood disorders, on the one end I can have things like very, very mild sadness. Okay. And as that progresses, you can have something called dysthymia, which is chronic low mood. As it progresses, you can have depression. And again, in depression, you have mild, moderate, and severe. Then you can have something called cyclothymia, wherein there is mood fluctuation from high to low, but not severe enough. Then you can have hypomanic episode, which is one step below mania. Finally, you have mania, by which time the person has bipolar disorder. So it progresses from one level to another like a spectrum. So that is also a dimensional classification. So one can have a combination of categorical and dimensional classifications. Are you with me? Yes. So that brings us next to multi-axial classification, wherein for each patient and each condition, you consider it under different axes. Say mental health axis, physical health axis, social axis, okay, financial, job, all these axes are present, and DSM-5 is a multi-axial type of classification. One of the recommended books for you for your college is DSM-5, right? So
Yes.
we'll talk about that later on. So that is the different broad types of categories in psychiatry. And you need all of them. You can't ignore one over the other. You need all these classificatory systems so that you can better understand the patient's condition. So moving on to primary and secondary, I think you should be able to tell me because you have come across these terms in medicine and surgery and gynec and all that, right? What is primary? What is secondary?
Primary when there's no underlying disease.
Yes, underlying cause, right? Yes. Whereas secondary is always as a result of some underlying cause. Anyway, yeah, Parkinson's on its own can be primary. Schizophrenia is primary usually, right? When it comes on, usually in the second or third decade, it just comes on suddenly out of the blue. There is no underlying cause. So that is a primary condition. What about secondary?
Depression due to Parkinsonism.
Yes. So Parkinson is associated with number of conditions, which may include things like dementia, depression. Okay. So in those cases, it is secondary to the primary condition. So if the Parkinson is a primary, and if a person becomes depressed, then the depression will be secondary to Parkinsonism. Going back to the schizophrenia example, schizophrenia on its own occurring in the second and third decade, as it usually does, that is primary. On the other hand, if the same schizophrenia were to happen because the patient went out and abused cannabis, for example, because cannabis can cause trigger psychosis, and then he becomes psychotic and develops schizophrenia, what do you call that? It is secondary, isn't it? Because the primary underlying cause for that is substance abuse. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yes. Anxiety happening on its own, it's primary. Somebody has hypothyroidism and then becomes highly anxious, has panic attacks and everything, then it is secondary to a hormonal condition. Understood? Okay. So that's primary and secondary, that's basic stuff. Moving on to organic and functional, and that is a big issue in psychiatry. What do you mean by this? Yeah, organic, organ in psychiatry means there is only one main organ for us, that is brain, isn't it?
Yes.
So generally when we say it's an organic condition, it means that there is something wrong in the structure or the chemical nature of the brain. You understand what I'm saying? Whereas functional means it's the function of the organ that is affected without any change in the structure. Okay? For example, again going back to schizophrenia, if the person became psychotic because he had an accident and he had a frontal lobe damage because of the accident, and as you know, frontal lobe is severely affected. Frontal and temporal lobes are affected in persons with schizophrenia. And as a result of the frontal lobe damage, he's developed schizophrenia. So that will be an organic cause for schizophrenia. Do you understand?
Yes.
Whereas on the other hand, he develops schizophrenia spontaneously without any drugs, without any brain damage, then that will become a functional type of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, pure schizophrenia, which happens on its own, is usually a functional illness. It is not related to anything. It comes on spontaneously and proceeds. There are brain changes in schizophrenia also, but it's like a chicken and egg situation. We don't know which one comes first. Having schizophrenia itself may cause brain changes, but we'll talk about that when we talk about schizophrenia. But for now, remember that anything that is wrong with the organ, structure of the organ, that is called organic condition. I mean, it could be another organ also. Somebody becomes depressed as a result of hypothyroidism. Then the organ that is at fault is thyroid gland. Underactivity of the thyroid gland is leading to hormonal changes, leading on to depression. So in that case, it's an organic cause for the depression. Whereas if the depression, on the other hand, if it happens spontaneously, gradually, the low mood keeps worsening day by day until the person becomes so depressed that he or she stops talking, eating, interacting, then that is functional without any underlying cause. There is no structural change in the brain or the thyroid or any other thing that may lead to depression. You understand what I'm trying to say here?
Yes.
Somebody may have a panic attack spontaneously, going out in the market, sees the crowd, and you don't like crowds, you have phobia for crowds, you suddenly have a breathless feeling, heart beating fast, palpitations, tremors. That's panic attacks, which is functional. But somebody else has, let's say, mitral valve prolapse, right, in the heart, and that can mimic panic attack. It can cause palpitations, breathlessness. So in that case, what will it be? It is an organic cause for panic attack, and the organ that is having the problem is the heart in this case. But generally, for psychiatry, when we say organic, we understand that it's the brain that is problematic. Dementia is an organic condition. Why? Because the brain is already affected. There are structural changes in the brain. There are deposits in the brain. Lipoprotein deposits are seen all over the brain in people with schizophrenia. Sorry, in people with dementia, Alzheimer's dementia especially. So that becomes an organic condition. So that is the difference between organic and functional. The reason we need to understand that is because, or in terms of the treatment, organic takes precedence over functional. You have to treat the organic condition before you move on to other things. Yeah, I mean, you treat functional illnesses also, but if it is an organic condition, you have to treat the underlying cause. Basically, that's what it means. If it is an organic condition, the neurologist would also have to be involved because the brain is affected. Whereas if it is functional, as a psychiatrist, you can take over and start treating straight away. Which is why each time a person has schizophrenia, it is always important that you rule out any secondary causes, organic causes for having schizophrenia by doing, if required, an MRI scan of the brain, drug screen, blood tests, all these things, only to rule out any secondary causes or organic causes. You understood?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that is the importance. So coming now next to neurosis and psychosis. So these are two broad categories, as I told you earlier. Neurosis or minor mental illnesses. Minor means they're not very severe. They don't affect the daily functioning too much. And the insight is preserved. Insight means having knowledge about the illness. They still know that they are ill. And the classic example for neurosis is either anxiety or depression. If you are anxious, you know you're anxious. You'll go to a doctor saying, I'm feeling very anxious, I don't know why. On the other hand, psychosis are major mental illnesses. They are chronic and enduring. That means they last very, very long, even with treatment. And they affect your day-to-day functioning very severely. They cause all those things: impairment, disability, handicap. Those are seen more with psychosis. And insight is lost pretty early on in the illness. Classic example is schizophrenia. No schizophrenic during the episode will ever tell you he or she is mentally ill. They believe that they are normal. Same in mania. No manic person will ever come and tell you, I have mania, please give me treatment. They will always believe that they are normal. So there is loss of insight. Okay. So that's the key difference between neurosis and psychosis. It is one of the older methods of classifying. We don't usually use it very often these days, but it's still very important for you to know. Psychosis would include things like schizophrenia, delusional disorders, mania, psychotic conditions. Neurosis, all the anxiety disorders, mild to moderate depression would be under neurosis. Somatoform disorders will be under neurosis. Okay. Anything that has delusions or hallucinations is psychosis. Anything that has loss of insight is psychosis. Clear about this? So this is the basic classification based on all that we have discussed so far. This is the order of classification. One can have learning disabilities, which is another term. In the UK, they call it learning disabilities, but we call it mental retardation, right? Personality disorders, wherein the person does not have any mental illness like depression or schizophrenia, but personality issues are there, temperament issues, changes in opinions, the way they deal with daily situations. That is personality disorders. Mental disorders would include things like, the mood disorders, neurosis, psychosis, all those things. Adjustment and stress-related disorders. These are the milder forms of anxiety. So other disorders, developmental disorders such as ADHD, autism, and all these things. Developmental disorders can also be adolescent developmental disorders. And childhood and adolescent disorders. Classic childhood disorder is ADHD. Okay. So a little bit of 6 and 7 are somewhat overlapping with each other. So that is a basic classification. We'll move on to more formal classificatory systems next. And these are international systems of classification, and this is very important for you in psychiatry. One is ICD-10 and the other one is DSM-5 recommended by your college. So ICD-10 was devised by World Health Organization in 1992. And remember that ICD-10 is for all the disorders. That means medical disorders, surgical disorders, pediatric disorders, gynecological disorders, everything. And chapter 5 in ICD-10 is concerned with psychiatric disorders. And all of them are coded F00 to F99. So that is mental illnesses in chapter 5. You can study the diagnostic criteria for all mental illnesses by looking at chapter 5 of ICD-10. On the other hand, DSM-5, ICD is International Classification of Diseases. So it includes all the diseases. Whereas DSM-5 is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual version 5, devised by the American Psychiatric Association in 2013. So that means it is specifically for psychiatric conditions. You understand the difference between ICD-10 and DSM-5. ICD-10 is for all disorders, even non-psychiatric ones. DSM-5 is specifically for psychiatric conditions. ICD-10, so this is how it's arranged. As I told you, chapter 5, okay, and F00 to F99. First comes organic mental disorders. As I told you, you have to rule out organic conditions first. That's why ICD is also placing organic conditions right at the top. It includes things like dementia, all those things. Mental and behavioral disorders due to psychoactive substance use. The next thing you have to rule out is substances. Alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, and all those things. That's why that is placed second. Next, psychotic conditions, psychosis, such as schizophrenia, schizotypal, and delusional disorders. Next, mood disorders, mood and affective, like depression, bipolar. Then neurotic, stress-related, and somatoform disorders, which would include anxiety disorders, your adjustment disorders that I was talking about. Somatoform disorders like somatization and dissociation and all those things. Behavioral syndromes associated with physiological and physical disturbances, that is to do with medical issues. Disorders of adult personality and behavior, personality disorders. Then mental retardation, also called learning disabilities. Disorders of psychological development, that is early development. Behavioral and emotional disorders of childhood and adolescence, which would include ADHD and autism. And if it doesn't fall in any of these categories, you have that special category called F99, which is unspecified mental disorders. And the reason for that is things can be very vague in psychiatry, very woolly, difficult to categorize, right? So that's why you would have to have these extra categories as well. Clear about this? DSM-5 is multi-axial classification. As I was telling you earlier, it combines every aspect of the patient's condition. So axis 1 is psychological syndromes. Axis 2, personality disorders and mental retardation. Axis 3, general medical and physical disorders. 4 is severity of psychosocial and environmental stressors. 5, highest level of adaptive functioning in the last year. Psychological is our mental illnesses like depression or schizophrenia or whatever. Personality, as I told you, personality and mental retardation, both under the same axis. Any associated medical conditions like hypertension, myocardial infarction or whatever, so that leaves axis 3. Social functioning under any environmental stressor like being homeless, for example, divorced, job loss, all those things. And also for that particular patient, the highest level of functioning in the last 1 year. Because going back to the first slide, we discussed impairment, disability and handicap. So this system considers all those things. As the person has any severe disability or handicap because of that impairment in axis 1. So therefore, how is the person's functioning in terms of his social life, job, day-to-day activities? So it considers all those things. It's quite a comprehensive thing, but remember that you have to do these axes for every patient that you see. So for every patient that comes to you with whatever mental illness, if you use the DSM-5 classificatory system, you have to talk in terms of axis 1 to 5 for that particular patient. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So your diagnosis for that patient will have axis 1 to 5. Okay? So that will be the full diagnosis for that patient. And as I tell you, if you see the patient, say 2 months later, things in axis 3 might have changed. So we'll have to update all the axes. Things in axis 5 might have changed. So every time you see the patient, you have to write the 5 axes for the full diagnosis. So this is what we mean by multi-axial classification, which is DSM-5. ICD-10 will give you, both of them will give you criteria for making a diagnosis. Axis 1, psychological syndromes, that has all the criteria for making diagnosis of any psychiatric condition. For example, depression. Both ICD-10 and DSM-5 will tell you what are the criteria. Since 1 month, the patient should have the following problems. Biological symptoms such as loss of appetite, weight, sleep loss. Psychological symptoms such as feeling very, very low, loss of insight, anhedonia, loss of interest in previously enjoyed activities, suicidal thoughts. If all of these are present, or some of these, or at least 3 out of 5 of these are present, then this person is likely to have depression. So you will get these criteria in both the ICD-10 and DSM-5. There are some subtle differences between the two criteria, but largely, essentially, 90% of the criteria between ICD-10 and DSM-5 are similar. And the other reason for having these major classificatory books with criteria is I cannot diagnose psychiatric conditions under a microscope. I cannot take an early morning sputum sample, demonstrate Mycobacterium tuberculosis underneath the microscope, and say that the patient has tuberculosis. It does not work like that in psychiatry. Okay? So that is why every time I see a patient, I have to bear in mind each of these criteria for each of these conditions and go through that list to see if that patient has any of those criteria to make a full diagnosis. You are understanding now why we need this? So what is the key difference between ICD-10 and DSM-5? Origin, ICD-10, as I told you, international, whereas DSM-5, American Psychiatric Association. This may feature in some MCQ, okay, this table. Presentation, different version for clinical work, research and primary care. There are actually different ICD-10 booklets available for clinical work, which is what you and I will be concerned with, or research or primary care work, the posting that you finished. They may have ICD-10 booklet there also. Whereas DSM-5 it's not required because it's a psychiatric document, so it's just a single document. Okay? Languages. ICD-10 is published because it's being done by World Health Organization. It has multiple language versions. The Malay is also there. Whereas DSM-5, American, it's only English. Okay? Structure, ICD-10. Part of overall ICD framework, that is, it's just part of all the other disorders. Single axis, it's not multi-axial as in DSM-5. Only one single axis with criteria in chapter 5 of ICD-10, that is psychiatry. Multi-axial versions are available if you ask the WHO, I guess. Okay, I have not seen those. Anyway, multi-axial is DSM-5, it's always multi-axial. The content, criteria do not include social consequences, ICD-10, it just gives you a description of the disease. Whereas criteria include social impairment, axis 4, so it's social impairment, isn't it? That's considered in axis 4 in DSM-5. And you can also probably talk about axis 5, which is highest level of functioning in the last year. So it's quite comprehensive DSM-5, and it required to be comprehensive because it is concerned mainly with psychiatric conditions. Whereas ICD-10 has a larger role because it is all the conditions under the sun. You understand the difference? Okay?
Yes.
But that does not mean that ICD-10 has any less number of diagnostic criteria for these conditions than DSM-5. It has the same number. There's hardly any difference between the two as far as mental illnesses are concerned. Okay? Etiology describes the causative factors of mental illness. Etiology means causation, as you know. Individual factors and general factors. Individual factors means what is that person's genetic makeup, any family history. Has he had a job loss? Is he divorced? Did somebody die in the family? So these are individual factors. General factors would include things like does he belong to any group of people which is vulnerable? For example, is he racially vulnerable to having certain conditions? I can't think. Yeah, I mean, they say that schizophrenia is common in certain parts of the world. and in certain communities. So those could be general factors for developing that particular illness. So it's a comprehensive way of coming at the etiological factors. Psychiatric assessment would include history, mental state examination, and physical examination, because you have to rule out the organic conditions, remember. Differential diagnoses, which include organic, functional, personality disorder, mental retardation, or learning disabilities. We discussed about organic and functional conditions earlier. Then the formulation, the biopsychosocial thing, and management, both should have biopsychosocial. So we do something called etiological formulation in psychiatry. This is very important, this table. You might want to note it down. So formulation, at the end of history taking and mental state examination, and once you have made a provisional diagnosis, we ask for a formulation table. And this is the table. Biological, psychological, and social. Biological would include things connected with the body, right? Biological is also called physical or somatic. Psychological would be all the mental processes. Social is things like in his day-to-day existence, like family life, job, finances, those sort of things. So for each of these, there could be, for each condition, there could be predisposing factors. Predisposing means the person has the condition which makes him vulnerable to develop another condition, right? For example, hypothyroidism is a predisposing factor, biological factor for somebody to become depressed. Psychological would include things like, say, he's had an abuse. So abuse becomes a predisposing factor for having later mental illness. Precipitating factors was what was the immediate trigger for having the illness. He had a cannabis, and immediately after that he became very psychotic. So that is a precipitating factor. Somebody abused hallucinogenic drugs, magic mushroom or whatever, and developed schizophrenia. So schizophrenia was precipitated by the patient using hallucinogens. So that is a precipitating factor. You understand? Job loss can be a precipitating factor for somebody becoming depressed. So job loss will be a social precipitating factor. What is to perpetuate? Anything that makes the condition to continue. There's no let up, it just continues. Hypothyroidism itself can be a perpetuating factor for depression. You keep on giving antidepressants, the patient's condition is not improving. Why? Because you are not addressed the underlying cause, that is hypothyroidism. Give him a course of thyroxine and even the depression may disappear. So the perpetuating factor was low thyroid level, which led to non-response of the depression with antidepressants. So that is continuing factors or perpetuating factors. Ongoing marital problems, social perpetuating factor for somebody to have anxiety or stress, right? Every day there is marital discord in the family, arguments between husband and wife. So the wife's anxiety is not reducing because the perpetuating factor is social perpetuating factor, in her case is the marital discord. Understood?
Yes, sir.
Protective factors are the opposite. That may actually prevent you from falling illness. So that also sometimes we need to know. For example, having a very good family support protects the patient from having another relapse of schizophrenia. You made a diagnosis, you have given him treatment, you have explained to the family saying, take care of him because he's got schizophrenia, make sure he takes his medications regularly. Family is doing its job very, very well. Patient does not have another episode of schizophrenia. So that is a protective, social protective factor. Right? Psychologically, the patient is very, very well adjusted. Stress has reduced and he's able to take the daily ups and downs in his stride and move on. So that is a psychological protective factor from having any relapse of the illness. Clear? So this is how you have to think for every patient and fill up this table, especially during case presentations when you take the history and present it to the tutor. Okay. for example, for bipolar disorder, predisposing biological could be family history of bipolar disorder, bipolar affective disorder. Psychological could be childhood sexual abuse. Social could be difficult upbringing, dysfunctional family. Precipitating factor could be stop medication. He stopped the antipsychotic and immediately became manic. Drug abuse. He took cannabis and became manic. Sleep disturbance. Very common in a relapse of mania. It's difficult to say which one comes first, mania or sleep disturbance. Distressing events. Psychological. Social, divorce, loss of job can trigger episode of depression or mania. Perpetuating factors. Biological, poor medication compliance. You are prescribing the medication, but the patient is not taking the medication. Therefore, mania is not controlled. Drug misuse. Even though the patient is taking the treatment, he continues to abuse cannabis. Therefore, mania is not controlled. Negative thoughts are continuing the depression. Poor social support. He's living alone, living rough, no home, homeless, jobless. Those are perpetuating or continuing factors for bipolar to continue. Understood? This is how you have to do for every patient and every condition, especially when you are presenting the case history. Management is also biopsychosocial. Management, remember from your medicine days, it includes two parts, investigations and treatment. So what are the investigations which are biological to do with the body? Blood tests, drug screen, urine drug screen, for example, ECG, CT, MRI of the brain, for example. Psychological investigations would be rating scales, IQ assessments, cognitive assessments. Social investigations would be home status, OT, occupational therapy assessments, skills assessment, financial assessment. Treatment, biological, is all the psychotropic medications such as antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, anti-dementia medications, anti-ADHD medications, antidepressants. ECT is also a biological treatment, nothing to do with psychological, okay? In ECT, you give anesthesia and pass mild electric current in the brain. So it is a biological treatment. Psychological would include things like counseling, cognitive behavior therapy, relaxation therapy, psychodynamic psychotherapy, marital therapy, family therapy, interpersonal therapy, dialectic behavioral therapy, which is included in one particular type of, which is indicated in one particular type of personality disorder called borderline personality disorder. Various examples of type of talking therapies, that is psychological treatment. Social would include psychoeducation of the family. You have to educate the family about the person's illness. Placement issues, whether the housing is appropriate. Vocational help, that is job help, job skills help. Financial help, financial status to the patient. So the patient is the patient jobless, therefore he or she requires financial assistance from the government, which is the job of a social worker to make sure he or she gets it. So all these are part of management, investigations plus treatment. Biopsychosocial, this is very important. When you present the case, in the end, after the formulation and everything, this is how you talk about management of that particular patient and that particular condition. So depending on the patient and the condition, these things will change. For example, if you are seeing somebody with depression, you can say, under blood test, you can say, I'm going to do a thyroid screening, because that's very specific to depression. Okay? And then psychological, you can say, I'm going to do a rating scale called Beck's Depression Inventory, which is specific to depression. Treatment, again, you can, instead of saying psychotropic medication, you can straight away say, I'm going to give him antidepressant, especially SSRI, fluoxetine 20 milligram. Or if the depression is very, very severe, you can straight away say, I'm going to admit and take him up for ECT. You understand what I'm saying? So it changes from condition to condition. But this is just the general table, which I hope you have made a note of. Okay? So this is going to be very important when you talk about managing conditions.